let's spend the time with Richard and Glenn, and then you'll be doing your legal submissions tomorrow morning. Was that the plan?
Correct. Yes, I've filed my legal submissions.
Yes, we've seen.
I'll bring copies of those. I'll do them in the morning, and then Mr. Connolly, Ms. Spate, and Ms. St. Amand will go.
Rachel, thanks for keeping the comms channels open to everyone. There's emails coming through, so I think we're in good communication now amongst the parties.
Just before Mr. Landon Lane starts, and Mr. Connolly is here to answer questions as well. I imagine you'll probably have a lot of questions for Mr. Landon Lane, and given he isn't available tomorrow, he was going to read his summary statement, but I wondered if you wanted him to highlight key parts, or if you wanted him to jump straight to questions.
No, look, I think we're comfortable for Richard, you to read through your statement. I find that's quite a good way of just settling into the issues. We've got an hour, so we're not being kicked out, right, Megan? No, so I think let's just get into it, and then what we'll do, I'll ask David to go through the same sort of position statements and get any updated comments from both Richard and Glenn, and then we'll have any particular questions we have for Richard, and then pick you up again tomorrow, Glenn, with your evidence. Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir. I'll hand it over to Mr. Landon Lane to read out his summary statement.
Thank you.
Cool. Just checking you can hear me, Commissioners?
Yes, you're all good. And
good.
Everyone else can hear? Just. So just
right. Speak a bit louder if you like.
Okay, let's go for it.
Okay, my name's Richard Landon Lane, Principal Traffic and Safety Engineer for Wakakatai. My role in this was I undertook crash prediction modelling for the two possible plan change scenarios. Compared these to the existing environment as in what's currently allowed for at Cashmere Oaks, and based on the expected traffic volumes, the crash prediction modelling predicts that there'll be a more than minor increase in the death and serious injury crash risk. But an additional part of the modelling was we compared it to if a roundabout was installed as a possible mitigation measure, and that indeed showed that installing a roundabout would reduce that DSI risk. I would point out that the crash prediction models are simply mathematical equations, and there are a bit of a best guess based on they were calibrated against 100 other. Well, the rural ones I know were calibrated against 100 intersections for the T intersection option, and there's 21 other rural roundabouts they were calibrated against. But I'm sure you're well aware of this, because they're a mathematical equation, they can spit out answers to 6 decimal places if you want, but that's not the intent of my analysis. They're more of a indicative tool to give an expected sort of trend. Specifically for the rural crash models, they don't really take into account any site-specific pros and cons. With respect to Cashmere Oaks, you've heard from a few people that the majority of traffic is oriented towards Masterton, and so a lot of traffic is right turning out and sort of left turning back in. So that's an additional sort of risk factor for this intersection if I'm just comparing it to a generic New Zealand T intersection. If you'd like me to explain a bit more detail why that's an extra risk factor, I'm happy to do so. I think Mr. Georgeson touched on it, that when you're right turning out, you've got to give way to 2 directions of traffic, and it's a bit of an extra cognitive load. The other thing is one of the common crash types of that is that the driver side door is the one that suffers the impact. Whereas if you're right turning in, it tends to be the front corners of the vehicle which tend to hit, and so there's just a slightly less protection on a driver's door. So that's the other sort of factor with that. Another risk factor for Cashmere Oaks under the rest home scenario is the possibility there's slightly more elderly residents who are using intersection, and the elderly are just more susceptible to the laws of physics in a crash, so they're at slightly higher risk. But as I say, the crash models don't take into those account. On the plus side, I did drive through the intersection a couple of weeks ago on the way to Hawke's Bay. I don't have any real concerns about the site visibility. It's a straight piece of road. I went in and out, and there was no problem there. But I guess what I'm saying is due to the risk factors around the right turnout and the potential for slightly more vulnerable users, I'd consider the models are probably slightly conservative. I've used a traffic growth rate of 2%. I think Mr. Connolly will speak to that might be a bit on the light side when we compare the 2022 counts to the 2019 counts, and that may be reflective of the recent Arvida development and even Cashmere Oaks itself slowly building up. So anyway, the modelling results are as expected. If you add traffic to an intersection, you will increase the crash risk. But for both the scenarios, scenario one, I think we're adding nearly approximately 2,300 extra vehicles. And other scenario two, the sort of mixed use development was about 1,800 extra vehicles per day. So as I say, these are mathematical models, so simply adding numbers to it will increase the crash risk. And again, the second part of analysing a roundabout, it just reflects what we know about rural roundabout installations. They manage speeds and they manage impact angles, and so the death and serious injury outcomes are generally a lot lower. I will just speak to some of Mrs. Muirson's summary evidence. She pointed out that the crash compendium states that we should adjust the traffic growth rate down for crashes. I would say that the actual statement in the manual says it may need to be adjusted down given the downward trend in crashes. So it's not mandatory to do it, and it's a reflection of, in the past, we certainly did have a national downward trend in DSI crashes. However, that's not the situation we're in at the moment. Our low point in the road toll was about 2013, and we've been a little bit up and down since then. So I wouldn't say we've got a continued downward crash trend. So that's why I was comfortable at leaving just the standard traffic growth rate in there. I'll just speak to, and Mr. Connolly will probably speak to these in more detail in his evidence, but Ms. Muirson outlined some potential mitigation measures, and I'll just briefly comment on how they would affect the modelling. Refreshed line markings. Our view is this is just business as usual. Yep.
Perhaps before you go there, I'll just interrupt.
Yep.
You've seen, we had quite a discussion with Ms. Muirson, I did at the end of the morning, about her table 2.
Yes.
And really got to the point that they were quite low, her advice was there was quite low changes in terms of DSI risk. So have you done something different?
I don't have a comparison table. She's looked at a 20-year time frame. I looked at a 40-year time frame. What I will say is her table 1, which is where she didn't adjust the growth rates, is probably going to be closer to the numbers I've got. And from memory, it showed that the top line of that table 1 The DSI number went from about 0.75 to 1.25, I believe, which would increase, well, basically saying a half an extra DSI every 20 years. And that would line up with the numbers I've got. I'm saying it would be one extra DSI over about a 40-year time frame.
Okay, so she's saying she's got a 20-year analysis period and you've done a 40-year.
Yeah, I just ran with 40. My past history of when we analyse roading projects for economics, we tend to use a 40-year time frame.
Okay, and when I go to your evidence, which table am I looking at?
I sort of more presented mine in graphical form.
Okay.
So if you went to figure 2, perhaps.
Figure 2 results.
Figure 2, scenario 1 results. So that simply just shows the result of the mathematical models. That the blue line is the middle is the expected number of crashes over time for the permitted current intersection in a 80k or 80 kilometre plus zone. It could be 80, 90 or 100. The top red line shows that if we add in all the extra volumes, the risk just increases as expected. And there's a bottom grey line which shows if we install the roundabout that positively, even with the extra volumes, the roundabout actually reduces the risk, which is a pleasant surprise. Given our normal baseline is try not to make anything worse for anyone.
Okay. Thank you. Just carry on. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, so just speaking to the proposed mitigation measures of Miss Mearson, we had refreshed line markings. Consider that sort of business as usual treatment will be done as a routine regimen, and we have no effect on the model outputs. Gating of giveaway signs. This is a limited effect on the model. It's more appropriate for rural roads where the driver has come from, say, a long distance away, and we're wanting to just really highlight, you've come to the end of this long road, and here's your intersection. Given the Cashmere Oaks is essentially a closed system, anyone coming out of there has likely gone in there the same way. So it's not totally relevant to that situation. The same with a diverge chevron board, highlights up in your headlights. Slightly useful, but will have no meaningful effect on the intersection models. There was talk of a safety barrier along the eastern side of the intersection. So a safety barrier is useful in a high-speed area to deal with loss of control type crashes. At an intersection, we're overwhelmingly concerned with the interactions between two or more vehicles and the impacts associated with that. There can be a loss of control it just so happens to be at an intersection, but it's not the primary thing we like to consider. She also mentioned installation of an intersection speed zone. So this is where you would have the sort of flashing speed limit signs, 150 to 100 meters each side of it. Now they get used as a retroactive kind of treatment, and the scope is pretty limited to where an existing intersection has a recorded crash history and the speeds are high. I don't believe that applies at Cashmere Oaks. We've had evidence that the speeds, even though it's posted at 100, the speeds are down at 70 to 80, which is as expected given its, I guess, proximity to the urban fringe. And also the existing intersection has obviously got no serious crash history, and it's probably reflective of the low current volumes that are there. The other two minor improvements, ECDs, are the lighting improvements. There is existing lighting at the intersection, you could add in a little bit more, or not expecting that to have a meaningful impact on the long-term crash models. And there was a suggestion of trimming the vegetation, similar to line marking. That would just be a BAU maintenance regimen. When I drove through it, it didn't appear that the trees were significantly impeding on any sight lines. So my conclusion is that like none of those proposed mitigations will meaningfully mitigate the intersection crash risks. The development, the additional traffic volume that caused by the plan change will increase the crash risks, and the modelling we've undertaken predicts a roundabout could mitigate those crash risks, and in fact would probably lower the crash risks over the current situation.
Thank you. I think that's the end of your summary,
Yep,
Richard.
yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
I'll ask one question before handing over to David to sort of take you through the more general aspects. You note 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potential safety improvements.
Yep.
That Melanie's talked about, Richard. You say for each of them, no meaningful effect on the modelling.
Correct.
What about cumulatively?
The cumulative effect, it would be the same conclusion.
So don't even bother.
I mean, we're talking about maybe a 1 or 2% kind of change that would do. A lot of the stuff like the chevron board would be, a lot of these are retroactive, or for certainly for greenfields projects, we would install them sort of as part of just expected design. So
okay, so all those 7 treatments or interventions or safety improvements, your evidence is they might have 1 or 2% change.
Yeah, they're not going to have this.
A change to what, Richard? A change to?
You could argue that they have a very small positive effect on the safety. So lighting and the chevrons and the signs probably particularly useful if there's a nighttime crash problem. I'm not aware this is a heavy nighttime use site, but
okay. Can I then ask you a quick question before we go to the more general things? Appendix 3 of Glenn's evidence. Have you read Glenn's evidence?
not today. Let me bring it up.
So I take it you read Glenn's evidence before it's
yeah, I read it last week or something.
At the table of the
Index
crash
3?
history. Yep, English language listing of the crashes, Richard.
Right. Yep, found it.
So I was really thinking about your 6.4, where these safety barriers sort of really do have some benefit in terms of loss of control type crashes.
Yep.
My read down that list of 8 crashes is that 7 out of the 8 are loss of control crashes. So does that change your opinion of the effectiveness?
Yes, it would certainly address those crashes. I can't quite read what the severity of those are, Glenn, but yes, if this is a particular loss of control black spot, for want of a better word, then if the barrier is installed where they are losing control, it could mitigate that risk.
Just to assist, there's one serious and
Okay, you're being a bit vague. You're sort of using vague words there, Richard. Would it or wouldn't it?
Yes, if
Yes.
Based on 8 loss of control crashes, I could see some benefit in installing a safety barrier to address those crashes.
I would comment and note that if you look at figure 1, which shows the location, that's quite a long location over which the crashes are dispersed. So the guardrail would need to be in the right location to address those crashes, and they are over a diverse area. So if you look on page 8 of my events, figure 1,
Right.
and then in figure 2 on page 9. And then the collision diagram shows them collectively on figure 3.
So, Glenn, they're effectively from, I can't read your figure 3. If you could help me with the street at the bottom of.
It's essentially from Somerset Drive, so north of Arvida down to 4th Street. So there's only really one in proximity to the intersection of Cashmere Oaks Drive.
Okay. Thank you. Right, I'll hand over to David now.
Thanks, Stephen. Mr. Landon Lane, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Commissioner.
Good, thank you. I just wanted to take you back to your summary statement, paragraph 5.
Paragraph 5, yep.
And this is the point that you emphasised earlier, that the compendium states that there's a discretion to actually adjust the downward trends and crashes. It's not mandatory to apply that. Obviously, Ms. Mewson has, and that's the difference between her table 1 and table 2. You'd agree?
Yep.
Does your figure 2 attempt to do that at all? That's your.
I have additional figures later on where I have, in terms of sensitivity analysis, where I've adjusted the traffic growth. So I ran the model with a 2% growth rate, which is the figure 2 result.
Growth rate, yes.
Yes, if you go to figure 4, that is with a 1% growth rate.
Yes.
For the same scenario, and figure 6 is a corresponding 3% growth rate scenario. So if you compare the 1, 2, 3% growth scenarios, the graphs look very similar. It just changes the slopes slightly.
Yes, that's a change in growth rates. How does that equate to a downward trend in crashes?
So the compendium talks about a downward trend in national crashes, and that's a position we as a country were in several years, maybe 10, 20 years ago, when the road toll was trending down. So it recognised at that point in time that despite the country growing in population and traffic growth, we were successfully reducing the road toll. That's not the sort of situation we're in at this point in time. The road toll figures are being fairly static, and I'd argue that even the low point was 2013 in terms of fatalities, and it was similar for DSIs.
Yes. What's your understanding of the growth rate reduction that Ms. Mewson's applied to derive her table 2?
I would be guessing, but I'm assuming she's subtracted 2% from the 2% growth rate. So she's come up with that there's no growth at all.
Yes, I'd assumed the same, actually. Yep. I didn't ask her, though. But maybe we could get some clarification of that, just looking at Mr. Mahinick. Thank you. So, if we were to look at Ms. Mewson's table 1 and table 2, and I think you said that your results are probably more in line with her table 1 than table 2. Is that
Well, yes, as in, I believe her table 1 was, she had a traffic growth rate in them,
yes,
and table 2, she'd taken it out.
yes, yes. So that provides the sort of spectrum or range of predicted DSI equivalents, doesn't it? Without a growth rate at 1.25 and sorry, with a growth rate at 1.25 and without it at 0.85. That's the spectrum that we've got in front of us in terms of evidence.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. And you'd well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm taking it that you'd ask us to exercise caution and adopt the 1.25.
Yes.
Yes. In the scheme of things, is that still significant? The chair put a question earlier to Ms. Mewson about what a high figure might look like, and I think she said in the vicinity of 3 or 4 DSI. That was my understanding. Was it?
But if it went over the, I heard some clarification that it might go up to 12 if you took it over a 20-year period.
That was from that clarification came from Mr. Georgeson, I think, because Ms. Mewson had done it over a 5-year period. Any comment on that, Richard?
Yes, so the 3 DSI crashes in a 5-year period, on a national scale, that would certainly trigger some concern, and it would meet the bar of being, this is a high risk intersection and there's a problem there. I guess the crux of my evidence is we're trying to avoid that situation by putting in an appropriate mitigation now to stop that eventuating.
Yes.
So
sorry,
I wouldn't like, as a road safety professional, I wouldn't like to leave the intersection, not just this intersection, any intersection, to wait for it to develop such a problem that then triggers that, oh, well, now we're suddenly in the high risk problem.
Yes. Regardless of whether it's 3 over a 5-year period or 12 over a 20-year period.
Well, I think you've got to think about the 12,
yes,
because that's the period of analysis that Melanie did. And so you're looking at a comparison of something just over 1 through to 12. So that's sort of a, there's a big difference there, isn't there, Richard?
Yes, and I think Ms. Mewson clarified that this fits in the low medium type band
yes,
for those numbers. So that's just reflective of these thousands of rural intersections across the country, and only a certain, the top echelon make that, high risk band.
I said at the start of the hearing, Richard, and you may not have heard it, is one of the things that we have to turn our mind to is whether there's any fundamental impediment associated with the rezoning that might mean that it just couldn't proceed. And if through the course of the hearing, it's clear that one of the key determinants is road safety, traffic safety at this intersection. The evidence of Ms. Mewson, though, would suggest that we're some way from achieving the sort of metric that's necessary to reach that conclusion that the plan change shouldn't proceed, or whether it needs a major intervention at the plan change stage that can't be dealt with already at the resource consent stage. And I know there's some planning concepts in there, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
What I can say in terms of meeting a metric for intervention, the high risk intersection guide, which Ms. Mewson refers to, the sort of intent of that is that it's cognizant of we've got limited funding money to spread across the network, and it's if your existing network is in this state, this is how you could prioritise the money. It's somewhat less appropriate for sort of new developments or greenfield stuff where you're adding, additional, you're adding a magnitude of extra traffic onto a system. That's the sort of case where we try and be proactive and avoid the problems happening.
If I may, I was of the same opinion. Essentially, the high-risk rural intersecting guide was aimed at addressing the existing issue we have in terms of the deaths in serious injury. So it was aimed at reducing our current death toll because it was considered unacceptable, and it's prioritising the funding. So if you're not funding in one area, it's spending that funding elsewhere to address the problem. With regard to the RMA, it's an adverse effect that's being introduced, and I don't know that looking at a national funding regime to address deaths and serious injuries is appropriate or a parallel to assessing the effects of the specific plan change. There is still an adverse effect associated with the risk of death or serious injury associated with this development. And I think it's appropriate to consider it in that context, not on a national funding for priority for high risk intersections, or for it to wait to get to that stage.
Okay. That raises the question of, and apologies, that is a planning matter, of what is the appropriate process for assessing the need for the timing and type of intervention. Would you agree?
I presume that's question is directed at me since I spoke last. I'd say yes, I'd take planning advice, and I would agree, yes, it's a matter of timing, and that's quite relevant to the proposal.
Yes. On the timing matter, and I appreciate we're dealing with two different witnesses here. The case from the applicant is one of the advantages of setting up this process in the plan change to enable a decision on the type of intervention at resource consent stage is that there might be a better understanding of what the traffic environment is at that time, particularly in relation to speed. But would you accept that argument?
I would if the resource consent stage had was sorting out the details, but as I'll indicate tomorrow, I've got concerns that the speed limit can't be achieved and that there's significant risk remaining at the intersection. So that's where my concern relates to approving it at the resource consent stage, as there could be some quite fundamental differences and it could be difficult to achieve at resource consent stage.
Okay, well, no doubt we'll pick up that thing tomorrow, but I'm very interested in that line of argument. Going back to you, Richard, I'll just check to see if I had any other questions. No, nothing else. Thank you.
David, I think you need to take Glenn and Richard through the same propositions that you gave the other traffic witnesses about their broad positions.
Oh, okay, I thought I had.
And to
thought I had with Glenn.
And to see whether, like you outline,
yes,
our understanding of Welhom's proposition,
yes,
and then Wakakatai's proposition, and I wrote all those down.
Yes.
And so, have you done that already, and I missed that?
I thought I put that question to Catherine and Glenn this morning.
Yes, so you did.
Catherine and Glenn, but not Richard.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
We've only got Richard this afternoon, so
yes.
I really wanted to get on the record.
Yes.
The 5 traffic experts.
Right.
Sorry to. So Richard, you listened to the discussion.
I did this morning. Yeah, I certainly won't remember the exact questions. But
okay. Well, I'm happy to do it again. What I outlined was what my understanding of the various positions of Welhom and Waka Kotahi in terms of the issue here. So broadly, Welhom's position was that the intersection's performing satisfactorily currently, just going off memory, that the proposed development would definitely add additional traffic to that intersection, and the performance of that intersection could be considered at the time of resource consent through a controlled activity status that would enable the need or necessity for interventions to be considered based and to be informed by an integrated traffic assessment. So that Welhom confirmed that that was their position. Then I contrasted that with the Waka Kotahi position was along the lines that they had concerns about the performance of the intersection, particularly under the development, and felt that a major intervention was necessary, not a management style intervention, to use the terminology that Ms. Mearson used, using the SAFE programs reference, and that it was necessary to have that intervention recorded in the plan change now, possibly via a structure plan that enabled staging and a type of precondition that would enable development to occur alongside the necessary infrastructure improvements at the intersection. And I think Mr. Connolly agreed that that was his understanding generally, and Catherine Sanana also gave the nod. So apologies if I've departed in any way from what I said earlier, but that's my best recollection.
Yeah, I wrote it down word for word. So the bookends to what David put in terms of the Waka Kotahi position was that the intervention is required prior to development, regardless of any speed restrictions. So that was our understanding. And the final bookend was that if there is a resource consent process, Waka Kotahi needs to be an affected party and be involved in the detail with, so a statutory position as a submitter. So does that summarise things for you, Richard, from a
yes, I certainly agree, believe an intervention should happen. I'm not a planner. I don't know regarding if it happens at a resource consent or at what stage, but I certainly endorse the view that we, as the road controlling authority of the State Highway, should be involved in that discussion.
Yes, and your position is really around the type of intervention. That's given your commentary on the 7 or 8 matters that Ms. Mearson indicated might be necessary.
Yes, and so I modelled a roundabout, and I can speak from a national perspective where we're generally supportive of roundabout interventions for rural intersections to reduce crash risk.
Okay, so and the key point for me, Richard, is that you agree that your position is that intervention a la roundabout is required prior to development, regardless of any speed restriction. Is that your position?
Well, I would say if, and this maybe it goes back to the bit of the engineer in me, but there are practical problems with trying to install a very large rural roundabout at that location. So to me, it would make more sense to install a smaller urban style roundabout, but that could only be done with an urban speed limit and a bit more urbanisation to make it feasible. From a planning perspective, I don't know enough about the provisions of resource consent process to how you'd make that happen. I'm just speaking as a engineer. If that would be the logical end goal, I think we should get to.
Okay, so you don't need to be a planner. We've got your opinion as a traffic engineer, so that's all good.
If I may, if Richard recalls what I said this morning, was I also agreed that the speed and the infrastructure would need to be integrated, which was a comment I made this morning.
Yes. Okay, so look, I do want to follow this up with another question, David.
Yes, please do.
Yes. So in terms of urbanisation, I signalled Glenn that I want to ask you, your evidence to us is that this is a rural area and a rural environment. That's clearly stated in your evidence. David and I, we've had 2 trips up and down, and we've seen the Avida development, and we've gone back and forth, and we've looked at this 85k intersection, and our non-traffic engineering expertise is when you come around that intersection, we've got Avida on the left, sorry, the curvature coming from the north to the south, and we've also got evidence that on the right-hand side, as you're coming from the north, the council's planning a future urban zone on the right-hand side, and that's in the draft district plan. And I'm looking at Megan here. Is there any indication that that area will be coming out of the proposed plan, or don't you know?
I'm sorry, no, it's just way too early to know that kind of thing.
Way too early, even though it's going to be notified in about 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff going on with multiple things.
Okay.
The council in terms of that.
Okay, so on the hypothetical that area is proposed to be zoned urban in the proposed plan, would you accept that you're moving into an urban or peri-urban environment, or do you still maintain that we're in a rural environment?
So is that a question to me or Richard or both?
Both of you, yes. Yes.
Richard,
Now,
do you want to go first or shall I go first?
Happy to go first.
Okay.
The urbanisation of a corridor, needs to, I would say, sort of needs to happen. At the moment, we've got the speed limit change signs to the south of the intersection. Like most things traffic engineering related, there's no sort of line in the sand that sort of says, oh, you're magically urban and now you're magically rural. This specific stretch, where certainly on the spectrum of moving from one to the other, there are engineering measures, I think, that would make it look and feel more urban, particularly when you think of normal sort of urban streets, the presence of curb and channels, footpaths both sides of the road, driveways, stuff like that. That certainly sends a signal to drivers this is an urban environment. That's not currently the case at Cashmere Oaks. Obviously, these things take time, and maybe this goes back to the planning type stuff as to how you manage that upgrade of the corridor to be urban.
okay.
I'm not sure that answers your question or not, but
I'm just saying, the current environment. You drive from the north to south, and you said, Richard, that you were there a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
Turn around the 85k area. Are you entering an urban or peri-urban environment?
It's certainly more semi-rural, peri-urban than urban. Like once you're past the sort of 50 zone, and you've got, I believe there's a shop on the left as you sort of come into Marsden. There's a definite signal you're now urban.
Okay.
Specific to the 85 corner, we have loads of 85 corners in rural roads around the country. So it's not a specific signal to me that I'm entering in an urban zone.
That wasn't what I asked. I said south of the 85 corner. Are you in a rural zone, like Glenn's giving us evidence, rural area? Are you in a peri-urban area, or are you in an urban area? That's as simple as that.
Yeah, I'd say as you move south, you're moving from semi-rural to peri-urban and then into urban as you're in Masterton proper.
Yep.
So from my perspective, I suppose you wonder what the purpose of the nomenclature is. From a driver's perspective, which I think is important, the environment is more rural. So what I mean by that is the speeds are elevated. So when you're driving through that environment, if you look at the speed counts, I think past the Arvida site, they're still over 90 kilometres an hour for the 85th percentile and 80 kilometres an hour plus for the average. So drivers are seeing that as not needing to slow down. So that's and so the first perspective is from a driver perspective, and that's relevant in terms of setting a speed limit, which is where the peri-urban nomenclature comes in. I think that's relevant to your speed limit. What you do is if you look at the interregional connector status of it, which is something I'll talk about tomorrow, it's a rural classification. The default for that is, or safe appropriate speed is 80 kilometres per hour, and that would reduce to 60 under certain circumstances, like if there were lots of driveways, but there aren't lots of driveways like you'd normally see in an urban environment. Driveways every 20 metres and houses. You can't see the houses, they're screened out by the trees on entirely on the Cashmere Oaks side. So if you look at it, it has got some significant rural characteristics. The right turn bays are built to a rural standard because of the higher speed. So if you're wanting to get to that transitional period, even if you class that as a peri-urban road, the default would be a 60 kilometre per hour speed limit. But if there's a higher standard, then that would go up to 80. So there's a band. So in this particular case, I would say that because of the environment there, the wide lanes and the geometry, and it looks like a rural environment, and drivers will more than likely drive it faster than 60 kilometres per hour. They won't respect that. And that's where the integrity of the setting of the speed limit comes into play, and you would not get a 60k speed limit. It would still be 80. So that's one of the concerns I have, and one of the fundamental differences is I see this staying at 80 kilometres per hour, and that presents a significant risk for the people moving in and out of that intersection, particularly that right turn movement. It's
Okay.
a long-winded answer about peri-urban versus something else, but that's the context.
Yes. Okay. Well, you're the expert. That's your opinion. That's fine. I'd now want to sort of take you, Richard, to your sensitivity testing around urbanisation. So this is your figures 8 and 9.
Yep.
Okay. So this is the 50%. This is a 50 speed limit, isn't it?
Yes. Yep.
You've thought about things if this area was 50, and we heard from Marion this morning that in terms of the way things are calculated, 50, 60s in one band in terms of the
yes, the model is for 50, 60 and 70 kilometre per hour speed limits, and then the high speed models are 80 and above.
Okay, so when you say this is a 50k, is the modelling really looking at 50, 60, 70?
Yeah, the model does not differentiate results between those three, and that's just a reflective of when the models were developed. They would have chosen 100 sort of urban intersections, and they would have fallen into that sort of range of stuff, and that's what they would have used to try and calibrate the models.
Okay.
So they haven't specifically developed the 51, a 61, a 71 because the numbers would be lower.
Okay, I understand that, but you've run these numbers for a model, haven't you?
Yes, the only input though is traffic volumes, so that the model just assumes it's one of those three speed limits.
Okay, understand that. So would it be more accurate if your title for your figure 8 would be 50 to 70 scenario? 50 to 70?
Yes, technically, yeah, the model is a 50 to 70 model. I just, for my purpose, I put 50 because I thought that was one of the things on the table was urbanisation down to 50.
No, this is super important for our decision making because this is a key issue for the whole case from what we're observing. So would you like us to change your figure 8 and figure 9 to 50 to 70k scenario 1 results?
Yes, that's an accurate reflection of the model. Yep.
Okay, so when you look at that, the roundabout intervention between 50 and 70, can you just tell us what you see the roundabout doing over the next, say, 30 years?
So if I look at
against the
figure 8, so against the baseline, what it is actually indicating to me is that because the baseline has lower side volumes, introducing the roundabout is not giving you a significant benefit. And my explanation for this is when you have a T intersection, and we say, well, installing a roundabout is good for DSIs, but at low volumes, when you install a roundabout, you will increase the number of rear end crashes, simply because you're putting something there where both the north and the southbound traffic, they've not had to stop at all. So that does increase the risk for that. And at the very low side road volumes, the number of vehicle interactions is not high enough to really give you the benefit of a roundabout. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I can't see over the 30-year period. I can't see any benefit from the roundabout. Am I seeing something?
No, the numbers are very close.
Yes.
They'd be well within any sort of margin of error.
Yes. Okay.
I
So
will point out the model is sort of focused on motorized traffic, and if we are looking to redo these models at some point in the future, we'd probably have more of a future focus on vulnerable road users, pedestrians and cyclists, and how that would then fit into these models.
Okay. But looking at that graph, is your base T intersection with existing volumes? Does that existing volume
sorry, I should clarify the roundabout line includes the extra volumes, and the blue line is the lower existing volume. So adding in the extra volumes with an urban roundabout means that the outcome is the same. The predicted number of crashes balances out.
Yeah, even with the increased volumes. But I just want to understand how you've input the numbers. Is the existing volumes, is that the current traffic count, or is that what's been consented?
No, it's the consented in a run with, I believe it's 161 permitted lots, and we've multiplied that by 9 trips per day. And
Okay.
we got that 9 from the existing traffic counts, which are, I believe, 70 existing lots at 620 or 610 or something. Yep.
Okay, so the existing number is the consented number.
Yeah, it's not truly reflective of what's actually built out there at the moment.
Okay, that's great. So just the last question I really have with looking at figure 8 is with the T intersection, I'm reading off the graph. So with the roundabout at 2055, which is a nice sort of say 30-year out, we've got DSI of about 1.1.
Probably 1.1, yep.
Yeah, as opposed to 1.4, say, with the T intersection.
Yep.
So that's a range we're looking at over 30 years. If you're looking at a 50 to 70 k speed limit.
Yeah. If it was a lower speed limit than now.
Okay. So, and we're going to get some information from Mark Georgeson about when you're looking at those sort of numbers, what that might mean in terms of level of service. Or is that yes, whether it's a C and it's still a C, or whether it's low, medium, and whether it's in terms of the categories. So would you agree that we're dealing in that low end of the spectrum, either with or without the roundabout?
In terms of the pure numbers of DSIs, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, and Glenn, would you agree with that as well?
Yes, in terms of the modelling, it's fewer numbers of DSIs, yes.
Yes, okay. And would you also agree that the modelling is sort of in that plus or minus 10% accuracy? You're saying it's conservative. Not sure whether it's conservative on the that was Mark's view, but is this more, when you say it's conservative, is it?
I believe Mark's view would be that his view of 10% probably applies to the SIDRA modelling, which is what he's done. In terms of the crash modelling, as the crash numbers are much lower, much harder to predict compared to SIDRA. I mean, SIDRA, you can go out there for a couple of hours and calibrate the cues you see against the traffic. for us to try and calibrate DSI crash numbers would involve observing something for, decades. So the crash model plus or minus, I would expect to be bigger than 10%.
Okay. So give us an order. You've calibrated against 100 intersections, I think he's told us.
Yep. Yeah, the rural T intersection model was calibrated against, that's the figure I do know, is 100 intersections, and the rural roundabout model was calibrated against 21 rural roundabouts. Okay. But I do not have the figures on me for the urban models.
Yes, but that's a reasonable sample if you're...
Yeah, so it used 10 years of crash history per site, so 10 times 100, arguably there's a 1,000 years of crash data which is fed into those models.
Richard, it's in terms of calibration, is that calibration or normalized, then what sort of variation is in those? Sorry if I may ask the question.
Of course.
Oh, it's probably a bit beyond my statistical knowledge at this point in time. I do know crashes tend to be Poisson distributed, and so
I'm getting a fly on me. That's why I'm taking my hand around, and not for any other reason. Look, I think that's been a pretty helpful discussion. Just interpreting graphs. David might have another question.
No, I don't. I just wondered whether there was any particular points on figure 9 that you wanted to.
That's the mixed scenario.
Yes.
So that's
it's similar to 8. It's just slight change in volumes because the development scenarios are mixed rather than full residential.
Yes. Okay. So that's the main point, isn't it? Less traffic.
Okay. Well, look, I think we've got that discussion. It's been really, really helpful. Really appreciate that. David, did you have anything else?
No, I don't. Oh.
Yes. So the chat around your graphs has been really, really helpful for us, Richard, because I'm sort of a visual person, and those graphs are really helpful. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow, Glenn and Liam, but not you, Richard. Have a good day tomorrow.
All right, thank you very much.
Which one of you was affected with your family with Cyclone Gabrielle? Was that you, Richard?
Yes, I drove up to Hawke's Bay. You'll know Pakawhai Road is where my mum lived. So she's somewhat homeless at the moment, but just waiting on insurance to sort it out.
As you know, I think I'm from Hawke's Bay, and I've driven through there a few times. It's very confronting. So all of best wishes on that. It's a pretty awful thing to be living through.
I spent 4 days shoveling silt, which is a bit different to my normal job. So
okay. I thought I'd just pass it on from David and I that we're very mindful of that issue.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're back with you, Liam, now in terms of just tomorrow. We're back with you, and we'll go from there.
Yes, sir. In the schedule, I think it was regional council to go first. I don't mind going first.
No, it is a regional council first.
Yes, unfortunately, they have someone with a time limit
That's
tomorrow.
All right. Yeah. Okay, we'll roll along and fit things in. So we'll close the hearing for today, and thank you again for your attendance and everyone in the room here as well. It's been another big day, and you've been of great assistance to us. Thank you.
Is it 9:30 tomorrow?
9:30 tomorrow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Georgia. Want me to turn this off? Leave.